All right. So, Vice Mayor Kandel, it's 5 seconds after 6 p.m. and you're live on YouTube.
All right, welcome everybody to our next meeting. Sorry it took so long. We had to delay it a couple of times due to the Democratic and Republican national conventions because we'd scheduled it on the final nights of both of those possibly. So thank you for hanging in there, and here we are again. So first, we'll have a roll call, and I do want to say that Cam Burks is unable to come tonight. He's not feeling well, and so it will just be Teresa and I. So Teresa?
Here.
Okay, yeah, here we're both here tonight. Adoption of the agenda. So after talking with Tiffany, we decided to switch the order of B and C. And so instead of doing the review and then talk about the name of the thing, we decided to do the review and then go over to prioritize the potential items before we get to naming. Because we might, after we do all that, we might have a far better idea of what the name may be. And so if that is okay, can I get a roll call for adopting the agenda, a motion for adopting the agenda?
I move we adopt the agenda as modified.
Great. All right. Well, thank you. And I second. And all in favor? I know it's so funny with just two of us here. Sorry about that. Great.
Yeah.
Me too. Thank you. So we'll adopt the agenda. So our discussion items that we came up with after the town hall is we had said that Tiffany was going to review the synthesis of the stories from the town hall event and the stories submitted. And so she has done that. And it was, hopefully you guys all saw it. It was posted with this agenda. And so we're going to have Tiffany go over these items. So just
Vice Mayor Kandel, do you want to just see if there's any public comment for items not on the agenda?
Oh, thank you. I went straight. I missed that one over. Sorry. Yes. Is there any public comment for items not on the agenda tonight?
Okay, no public comment. So
okay,
we're good to go.
Thank you. All right. So we will also do this review, and Tiffany will do her review. And then we'll have Nirup go over her spreadsheet before we go and go to public comment. We thought that was a much better way to separate the items out here. And so if you can keep your comments until after Nirup has taken apart what Tiffany synthesized and go over her spreadsheet, then we'll go into public comments. We'll have hopefully far more meaningful comments by doing it this way. So thank you. So Tiffany.
Thank you, Vice Mayor Kandel. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and share my screen just to do an overview of the format of our discussion for today. So it's going to take over your screens in a moment. Okay, so there's a couple of key areas that we're going to be going over for today, as Susan mentioned. I'll be doing an intro and overview. We'll be reviewing the synthesis of stories. We'll be discussing priorities, structure, and name of the task force, and then we'll go into our closing for the evening. And so to begin, as you all recall, today is this follow-up of the very powerful town hall that we had over a month ago, July 30th, on racism and discrimination. And so I am Tiffany, co-founder at Circle Up Education, going to be guiding the conversation for today. And today's objectives, this evening's objectives, are threefold. The first is to present a synthesis of the stories that were shared during the town hall on racism and discrimination, as well as a synthesis of the stories that were submitted to Love Lafayette. We're then going to be identifying priorities for short and long-term action based on the themes and frequency of the themes that were brought up in the town hall and the stories that were shared. And then the last is that we're going to establish the objective for this task force, determine the structure of it. Is it going to be community-based? Is it going to be city council-led? And then also talk about the naming of the task force based on the priorities that we've identified. And so the agenda for this evening We're ahead of schedule, which is awesome, is that we're going to start by presenting and discussing the synthesis of stories. So as Susan mentioned, I'll be sharing the synthesis of the themes of the stories and recommendations. Narup is going to be sharing out a spreadsheet of the areas that we've identified as within city purview and outside of city purview. The task force will have an opportunity to ask any questions, and the public will be able to make comments as well. After we present the synthesis of stories, we're going to spend about 25 minutes to allow the task force to use that spreadsheet to identify 2 areas of short-term priority that the task force would like to move forward on, and then 2 long-term priority areas so that we can work towards more of a consensus in terms of the direction for the task force itself. The last hour or so, we'll be deciding on a structure. So based on those priorities, what should be the structure of the task force based on the objectives as well as the name. So we'll present different options for the task force to review. We'll allow public comment to speak on it, and then we'll have a discussion and vote on those key areas. So to begin, the synthesis of stories that was shared. So I'll go ahead and start that. For anybody in the audience, I'll go ahead and screen share the document, the synthesis document, but if you'd like to view it on your own screens, I put a hyperlink here, bit.ly/townhall-synthesis. But task force, let me go ahead and switch my screen share now so I can share with you the synthesis of stories. So we were able to gather lots of different submissions. I think there was like over 45 stories that were submitted to the online Share Your Story form. There are also many, many people who shared in the town hall themselves. Some of them were duplicates of the stories, others were unique experiences. But the first half of the synthesis is really about the themes of the stories and experiences. So what I did here was I extracted and I took all of the stories, both the ones that were shared verbally and submitted in writing, and identified themes within each of them. So, and then I also ordered them based on how often they came up. So a few of the key themes were around racist comments in the community. And so people shared about racist comments being made towards Asian people or women related to the coronavirus, comments discounting people's experiences of racism, like that doesn't really exist in Lafayette. That's not a reality here. There's also many comments around, or 2 comments to be specific, around comments and jokes among kids while shopping in stores, racist comments while shopping in stores as being Latino or Latinx. And then the next big category was around housing, housing not being affordable in Lafayette. So there's 8 comments related to that theme. And specific comments related to a lack of diversity in Lafayette due to the cost of living and the lack of affordable housing and home ownership. The next big key areas were around discrimination in the community on a lot of different areas related to people who have disability, related to race and disability, mental health and illness, being of a mixed race descent, a person being spit on, anti-Semitism. These are just a few of these examples. And then there's also school racism and discrimination as well. And then police and racial profiling was another big theme that people shared in terms of being stopped by the police or being racially profiled or seeing a neighbor or other community member being racially profiled. 2 people had discussed racist language in housing deeds and CCNRs, and to my awareness, I think there has been some movement and change in that area or discussion. Hate crimes, defacing Black Lives Matter signs, and the N-word being graffitied in public spaces. And then there's 3 comments around exclusion and a lack of belonging, people not feeling included or welcomed as a Black family, as Asian families, or Latinx families. And then the next kind of categories around recommendations and suggestions. So I also tried to put these in order The biggest category was around community education and training. So as you recall, the Share Your Story form both had share your story and then also suggestion and ideas. So a lot of people had written and made recommendations on helping kids understand systemic racism, how to stand up against racism, having different workshops for the community on structural and individual discrimination, implicit bias training, having speakers and clubs, bringing people into the library or community events to just build in terms of awareness, knowledge, and discussion. There's also the second category was around addressing housing as an approach to address racial injustice or racism, which is offer affordable housing, implementing rent control, options for people with disabilities, for senior population in Lafayette community. The other area was around city values and symbolic gestures. This was kind of broad, but again, wanted to capture as much as possible. So for instance, shining light on the history of historical racism in Lafayette, asking the city if we can truly consider low-income housing as a collective shift. Some people mentioned, although that's something that is nice to do, that's gonna cause some changes in the community. Putting up Black Lives Matter signs at court intersections, establishing a city ordinance for fining residents for calling the police based on race when it's unjust, for instance. Adopting Indigenous Peoples Day. Those are just a few ideas and suggestions. There's also specific areas related to school and related to police and also community values. More so about like how the community can stand up and speak up for each other, examining our own assumptions, becoming informed, more value-based actions in terms of community representation. There's also suggestions around discussion and voice, making more public forums and discussions about racism, having discussions about the misplaced blame on Asian American or Pacific American communities, Pacific Islander communities around COVID-19, just finding more ways to have forums or having a diversity of representation in different community and committee groups or task forces. And that kind of leads to the city inclusion of diverse voices and representations, just including people of color in Lafayette-related marketing materials. So there's a lot, as you can see. There's also planning in terms of changing zoning codes and rezoning, having specific events that promote inclusion and belonging, having a staff and council training around implicit bias, looking at how can we restore or reconcile our history around Native American relations, specific policies or practices around diversifying businesses or training businesses or business owners on diversity, racism, harassment practices, and then also different community programs like the Rock Garden that was mentioned at the end of the town hall. But those were some of the synthesis of recommendations. And so now I'll go ahead and pass it over to Naroop to be able to share the implementation recommendations document. And I can go ahead and screen share that as well, Naroop, if that would be helpful, or I can give it over to you to do that.
Actually, that would be really helpful. Thank you, Tiffany.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Tiffany. That was great. Nice.
Yep.
And thank you everybody for putting in all these suggestions.
Yes.
So we have lots of content.
Okay. Naroop, does this work, or would you like to screen share?
I don't see anything yet.
Why don't you?
Oh, I could. Oh, here it is. Sorry.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here. suggestions and the stories that we received were really moving and powerful, and we all thank you for it. There were so many suggestions, as Tiffany outlined. So staff with Vice Mayor Candel's guidance try to come up with a system by which we could actually begin to identify things that were within the city's control. Racism impacts all facets of society, and but there are only certain things that a city, as a city government, can do. So in order to zoom in on implementation items that the city can be responsible for, we prepared the spreadsheet, and it has a couple of columns that I'd like to explain. First, is it a recommendation that the city can implement or not? That was kind of the baseline criteria. The second was, how long is it going to take to implement this recommendation? Is it short term, which is less than 3 months, medium term, less than a year, or longer than that? And then how much is it going to cost? This entire undertaking is an important one, but it hasn't been funded. It's not part of the city's budget at the moment. So we really needed to take a look at some of the cost implications of these recommendations. So we identified, we categorized the recommendations by lower cost, which is under $5,000, medium cost, which would be $5,000 to $20,000, and then high cost, which is over $20,000. So I wanted to quickly go through the categories. I'm not going to get into each line item, but in the area of community education and training, I think the recommendations here are kind of evenly split between what the city might be able to do and what the parents or the schools may be able to do by way of education. So we've identified action items like creating more awareness about diversity on our webpage, providing a list of reading materials, identifying training sources that anyone could take on their own. And I will give you an example that we are researching at the moment. The University of California has a free, as far as I can tell, implicit bias training series. It's a series of 6 modules. So if you Google UC implicit bias training, it gets you to those modules. Each module is about 15 to 20 minutes long. It's not a long test or training, but it really delves deep into the forms of implicit bias. And I think it's a great foundational training that everyone could take. So we've identified, and we will continue to identify resources that our community can take advantage of. We've talked about redlining and the really racist regulations in titles. When you sell your property, the deeds carry some racist covenants. State Senator McCarthy was in the process of creating a bill that would have eliminated these statements. However, I think he couldn't meet the deadline for this legislative session, but will likely introduce it next year. So that's something to track as well. In the area of education, anti-racism, having powerful speakers, we have a fabulous partner in the Lafayette Library and Learning Foundation, and they are so skilled at bringing various speakers and resources to our community to educate us. And so we would like to reach out to Beth Needle, the executive director, and the foundation to see if we can partner in that education process. The area of housing is a powerful one. It's an important one. And we are we've just started the process of a general plan update. We're going to be first updating our housing element, and that has a specific deadline. And I think these discussions and the recommendations outlined here can be folded into the housing element update. The reason why they have high dollar signs is that some of them, like a rent control program, would require additional staff to run the programs. So some of them do come with a cost associated with it. And it's also longer term than a less than 3-month process. As far as city values and symbolic gestures, these were great ideas. Many of them are policy decisions that the council as a whole has to address. As an example, do we establish a city ordinance fining residents for calling in the police based on race? Well, it's a difficult policy, not one that I would recommend because it's a difficult one to implement, but yet it's a policy, and that therefore the task force has to take it to the city council for discussion and approval. We are very close to relocating Adam Dolberg's rock garden from the trail to the Lafayette Community Center. The Parks, Trails, and Recreation Commission is meeting next week to discuss the matter. And hopefully that will be our first concrete implementation action. The category on schools is outside the purview of the city, and I've shared this table and Tiffany's notes with the superintendent of the Lafayette School District because there are some great suggestions here as well. In the category of police, the Public Safety Subcommittee of the Council has addressed many of these items and has already come up with a set of 5 recommendations. And so our comments are that we would fold some of these recommendations into what the Public Safety Committee is already doing. Community values, great values, but it is really, again, outside the city to, for example, tell people not to post hateful comments on Nextdoor. We'd all love to have a more healthy debate on social media, but we can't control it. But it's something to be aware of. And then I'm just going to discuss discussion and voice and city inclusion together. I think these are in discussion and voice. This vehicle, this task force has served as the voice to hear people on this very important subject. But this evening and at City Council, we need to have a discussion of where do we go next? Does this voice or the venue rest with the council? Does it become an independent citizens committee that addresses school issues, addresses city issues, addresses all issues? Planning is very much the same as housing. It's a discussion that's worth having in the general plan update. The timing is really very, very perfect because what the council is doing at the moment is setting the stage for what Lafayette will look like in 20 years. And so this is the time to have these conversations. Events and inclusion, we have a number of wonderful nonprofits, and we can share this information with them and help them also perhaps adopt a strategy of inclusiveness. As I mentioned before, staff and the council, I'm recommending that we do 2 things. We look at the UC online training, and also internally that we consider joining the Government Alliance on Race and Equity. It's a resource for local governments throughout the country It's a very valuable resource. It's a support system, and it costs, I will say it costs, I think $1,000. So I want to make sure that it's got the right number of dollars in it. So those are two recommendations that I will be taking to the City Council. The topic of Native American relations, it's multifaceted. We've talked about the mural, which the Public Art Committee, I believe, is beginning discussions about that. There are other recommendations that have come up, and I will work with, staff will work with Tiffany to see how best to address that, because we have to do it with great sensitivity. As far as businesses go, once again, we don't control who comes to town and sets up a business. And although we would like to see a diverse array of businesses owned by diverse populations, it's not something that's within our control. And then community programs, we've talked about the Rock Garden and before, and we hope to see that implemented. So in summary, not all these wonderful recommendations are within the purview of the city. And those that are within the purview do come with a need for resources in terms of staff and in terms of money. And the next step would be for the task force to identify their top short and long-term priorities, and then take it to the full council for discussion. And I'm available for any questions.
Oh, thank you, Nirup. Thank you so much for taking Tiffany's wonderful output based on everybody's comments and suggestions and her synthesis, and then producing this spreadsheet for us to work with. I very much appreciate all that you've done. This was a lot of work, and seems very broad, and it helps us understand what we as a city can do. So I don't particularly have any questions. So Teresa, do you by any chance have any questions?
Not a specific question, and I have a feeling that one of the comments or additions will come up during public comment, so I can wait for further discussion after public comment.
Okay, great. Okay, so at this point, we would like to open up the public comment, and I just kind of want to give you some guidance. Obviously, you can speak about whatever you would like to do. I encourage you, as always, to do that. What would be helpful for us, for Teresa and I, is for you to, if you see things in here that you think are really important, let us know what they are. And that will help us. And if you can call it out by the number, the section and the number in it, that would be great for us to kind of keep track of where you are. So if you can include that with your comments, that would be wonderful. All right. So as always, Jeff, do we have any public comment?
We do. I just want to remind folks, if you're dialing in on the telephone, you can use the *9 feature. And if you're just tuning in through the Zoom webinar, just use the raise your hand feature, and we'll take them as we get them. And the first person up is Jeremy Levine, followed by Beth Ferrer. So here is, sorry about my pronunciation, but here's Jeremy Levine.
Hi, Jeremy, welcome.
Okay, Jeremy, you're on, so go ahead and start. You're unmuted.
Sorry. Knocked my thing over.
Looks like Jeremy's screen is blank too. I'm not sure if it's
Well, I'll tell you what, why don't we'll put Jeremy back in the attendee section.
Oh,
and
wait,
he can
hold on.
wait.
I think he just
Here it comes.
Wait, here he
Okay.
comes. All right.
Good afternoon, or good evening, I guess, at this point. Good to see you all, and I just want to say I'm really excited by all of the ideas that have been discussed. I think this is a great list that the staff put together, and I'm really happy to see this task force considering so many different strategies to increase diversity. That being said, I'm here to talk about housing, naturally. And I have a concern and a suggestion. The concern is that rent control has been demonstrated to not be a good long-term strategy for increasing affordable housing stock. They have, I mean, I say they, researchers, economists, political scientists, people of all stripes from academia have studied rent control a lot. The past 30 years have given a lot of opportunities for natural experiments. They studied it in San Francisco. The Brookings Institute has a lovely study that they did in San Francisco that demonstrates that rent control certainly benefits the pre-existing residents. No doubt about it, it benefits the pre-existing residents. But it has a few negative side effects. It leads to less housing being built in the future. It leads to a deterioration of the existing housing stock, and it harms all future residents. It ultimately harms some renters too, because it leads to an effect whereby people who are property owners, landlords, change from rentals to condos or selling whatever they have. And so the available supply of rental units decreases significantly. I'd be happy to share research with this task force, with the council. It's economic research, so there's always ambiguity and there's always issues with the data, but this is a very well-established trend of economics. I think that rent control is not a long-term solution to housing affordability. And it has short-term and long-term consequences that are very high. But you know what I do love? Subsidies. And subsidies aren't on this list for housing. And I understand that a subsidy would probably have to be funded from somewhere, maybe an impact fee on all of those nice $3 million homes in the hills that take up so much infrastructure to work with in our city, because we have to build roads just for those expensive homes, and that, you know, they're big homes in the middle of nature. They are worse for the environment and more exclusive than any other kind of housing. I grew up in one of those homes. I don't have a fundamental problem with them. I do think that people should, you know, we should look for ways that we can get revenue, and I don't want to limit it to an impact fee that's based on wealth. Like, I know some people don't like progressive taxes, but I think that we should look for strategies beyond sales taxes to find that revenue, and that subsidies are a proven, much more effective way to increase affordability for people than rent control, if you're looking at the long run.
Tiffany, I just want to check that you were keeping time here, because I'm showing about 3 minutes.
That was pretty much all I had to say. I was not keeping time, but that's what I had to say. I would, like I said, I would love to share documentation with the council and the city for what I've described. I'm not making this up. Like this is research, and I think that yeah, I appreciate you hearing me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for wrapping that up, and we appreciate all that you do, and thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Jeremy. I can definitely tell you bring a lot of different knowledge and expertise and research around economics and housing and short and long-term impacts, but definitely hearing your concern around rent control, not having kind of addressing the root causes that we're looking for, and also proposing subsidies as an option. Thank you.
Of course.
Hey, we do have 2 hands up right now, and I'd ask folks, if you do want to make a public comment, if you could raise your hand so we have an idea of how many folks we have, that would be good. Tiffany, just a little bit of housekeeping. Do you want to do the timing?
I'll do the timing.
Okay, sounds really good. Okay, here next up is Beth Faree, I believe, and followed by Tess Olson. So here comes Beth.
Welcome, Beth.
Okay, you're in, Beth, so you can unmute and go ahead and start.
All right, I'm going to do the video too. So my name is Beth Faree. I have lived in Lafayette for 35 years. And I appreciate the work you're doing. I really appreciate Jeremy Levine, who has been an enormous educator for me. Also, I raised 3 sons here who, as Teresa will tell you, have also been great educators for me. I'm speaking about priorities. I want to tell you, first of all, that just the city hall, the town hall, impacted the Lafayette Community Garden, which it was pointed out, we built a Miwok village without involving Miwok in the building of the village. We have not involved them in our summer camp program we did. We tried, but there was some complications. But it has instigated a very meaningful conversation between us and some of the local Miwok. And my son, who works for Greenpeace, taught me about cultural approbation and the fact that it's really important that we listen to and learn from other people's experience. And just this week on Facebook, the African-American woman who works with me made a comment on Nextdoor about her experience shopping in Lafayette. And it was pretty quickly discounted by someone who said, you probably misunderstood. I just think that it's really important that we continue to alert people that we have to listen to other people's experience and understand how different it is from our own. That being said, I think that there are lots of ways we can keep that dialogue going, and you've got a lot of wonderful organizations within and nonprofits within Lafayette that want to be involved in that. I really want to see the city focus on things that are the kind of things that Michael Cass and Jeremy Levine have raised as issues that the city can really make an impact and become known as a town leading the way in increasing diversity. So I appreciate your work. I really appreciate listening to you. And I just, again, thank you. Those are my only thoughts today. And thanks because you did help the Lafayette Community Garden address.
That's really great. Thank you for sharing very much. That's terrific.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
thank you so much, Beth. Yeah, it sounds like the first town hall really had an impact, like a really humbling experience too, and had these like rippling effects all over within your work in the city and also relationships with the Miwok community, and just a reminder and just a learning around how important it is to listen and get to know our community members and not discount their experiences. But hearing what you're saying about wanting the task force to focus on what it can only do because it has control and influence with city policies, and really involving the community around what the community can do around holding spaces and more education and conversation.
Thank you,
Beth.
Great.
Okay, we've got 2 hands up. Next is Tess Olson, followed by Michael Cass. So here comes Tess.
Hi, Tess. Welcome.
Hi, I'm Tess. I live on Moraga Road. And I just looking at the really extensive, beautiful layout, really appreciate that. I think that's great. I would like to just make my comment about urging the council to more focus on like policies and things that can affect like systemic issues, because I think things like rock gardens and support for that and trainings are super important also, and putting up signs can also help display our values to other people. That being said, I think that myself as a citizen, I can go out and organize those things and do those things. And what I think is really unique about the city council is that you are the ones that actually can implement policies that have like far-reaching effects for the entire community. So related to that, I'd really like, because I'm under no disillusion that these can all get done and have equal, weight put to all of them. So I would urge the council to more look at, again, policies. So things like housing, which I'd also like to, again, like extend my thanks to the council for passing the Terraces project, whenever that was, time doesn't exist right now, so I'm kind of forgetting, but I was there with you all the entire time. So I think that's one great first way. And also looking again at things like policing. I know that there's another task force for that as well. And there were recommendations that were, things recommended to the council. But I also want to urge that continue and not be like, okay, those were our 5 recommendations done, and continue to looking at different ways that we can alter that to make sure that all residents of Lafayette are feeling safe and secure. And sometimes that means, and for some people that doesn't mean what the police looks like now. Yeah, so those are my comments on that.
Great, thank you, Tess. Yeah, it sounds like you're echoing some of the previous shares around really urging the council, the task force, to focus on the policy aspects of what it can have influence over that will really address some of the systemic challenges around racism and discrimination. It sounds like you've been along for the journey for quite some time also around the previous projects around the terraces. So thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, so we have one hand up, and that's Michael Cass, who'll be joining in a second. If there's anyone else who would like to provide public comment, now would be a good time to raise your hand. Use the raise your hand function or *9. Okay, we've got another hand that just came up, and another one after that. This is great. Okay, coming in now is Michael Cass.
Welcome, Michael.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you, members of the task force, for continuing to have this conversation, to staff for the work putting together that spreadsheet, and also to Tiffany for just being a really great moderator throughout this process, which is really appreciated. I submitted a letter last night, which I'm assuming you've had an opportunity to review, with 30 recommendations. So apologize for how extensive it is. I hope that helps to convey how serious of an issue I actually think this problem is in Lafayette. And by no means do I anticipate that you would have the means to implement those all now. This is to just start the conversation of things that hopefully will be done over the coming years. Saying that, there's 3 from that list that I'd like to bring particular attention to. The first is item number 10 from that list, which is eliminating the existing policy which permits affordable housing units to be provided off-site, which is an unintentional form of segregation. So within the city's current inclusionary housing ordinance, section 6.3712 allows housing developers to provide the required affordable units on an alternative location. And quite frankly, that is we don't want them here. We want them there. And quite frankly, it's segregation. And I know that in the past, when that's happened, it's come from a positive place. The city has been able to negotiate, and in some circumstances has been able to obtain more affordable units. But the quality of those units is not the same, and it is segregation. And I would strongly encourage that policy to be eliminated. Second issue that I would encourage you to look at, and this is something that Jeremy Levine spoke to, is item number 11 from the list, which is to study the establishment of an affordable housing impact fee. But rather than tying it to value or cost, I would actually recommend that you tie it to house size. I think there is a nexus there between large homes, which has been an ongoing challenge for the city in terms of how to address those issues, and houses have become quite large. Citing a specific example, when I was a planner in Lafayette, one single family home that I worked on as a case point was 16,000 square feet. And I want to make sure I heard that
30 seconds, Michael.
16,000, not 1,600. And then the last thing that I would encourage you to do is item number 4 from the list, which is to implement a signed pledge agreement for all existing and future staff. And as part of that pledge, you would have staff sign a commitment that ensures the entire organization agrees to take action to cultivate an environment that includes diversity and inclusion. I'd recommend that you actually extend that and apply that to all appointed officials as well as all commissions, committees, and task forces. It's just a good way to have a constant reminder when you bring somebody on that they are in a role of influence, and being open and inclusive is an important value for this community. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. I'm sure I'm speaking on behalf of everybody. Appreciation of highlighting top 3 out of the 20, which were all really, really valid, awesome recommendations. But the first around eliminating the existing policy that promotes housing to be provided offsite, which could be another form of kind of institutionalized segregation. The second around studying the establishment of affordable housing and how we determine the affordability. I think, is that correct? And that second one.
Kind of.
There's kind of, you can correct me.
It's an impact fee that would help seed money to pay for affordable housing units. And it would likely be partnered with private development, grant funds, state and federal funding as well.
Okay, perfect. And then the last one was implementing a pledge for the city employees, agreeing to cultivate a environment of diversity and inclusion for current and future staff and elected officials. Teresa?
Oh, you added it, part of it, but I think Michael confirming it was that really everybody involved in city government, the commissions, committees. Yes. I didn't hear you say elected, but I appreciate Tiffany adding it.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael.
Okay, you have 2 hands up. Coming in next is Wee Tai Kwok, followed by telephone number ending in 373. I think I know who that is. And if there's anyone else that would like to speak, please raise your hand now. All right, Wee Tai Kwok is joining the meeting.
Hi there, Wei. Let us know if we pronounced your name incorrectly.
Yeah, Wei Tai Kwok. Hi, everybody. Good to see you. Very excited that we've at this next milestone of the task force. Really exciting. And I want to just make some comments on the summary that Tiffany prepared, then Nirup's city comments, and then one other thing about the composition of the task force moving forward. I really want to commend the summary. It was such a nice way to see the comments that have come in through the questionnaire, as well as the first town hall. And just to comment that I sort of view that as like the very first step of gathering information. We cannot imagine that we've, in just those 2 measures, been able to get 100% of comments on a very difficult issue of structural racism. I don't think that's something so easy for us to find. And I sort of see maybe that gets us 30% or 40%, but this is an ongoing process in dialogue with our community to have people feel comfortable that we're actually seriously addressing sensitive points, and that others who may have been scared to have come forward in the beginning step will have more confidence that this is a real process that we take seriously, and we really want you to step up and help us identify. So I hope the task force will speak to that being just the first of multiple steps that we want the community to further engage with us so we can make more progress. And the second comment would be on Nirup's report. I thought that was fantastic that the city can define what is within the scope of the city versus schools and, the library. We should really distribute and get the whole community involved and not look at this just as a city role. But to Tess Olson's comment, of which I strongly agree with, that the city does have a tremendous voice in setting the tone at the top. There's certain measures there about banners in the city, or just the tone that we are going to take this seriously. This is not just window dressing. I think that's important, but also the structural elements that we need to address and really push off some of the other things to community groups who can also become engaged and not use the precious city resources to do things that citizen groups can do. So that brings me to my final point on the composition. What's the task force moving forward? I would just offer up that I sort of miss that the most I feel that the most impacted individuals need to be at the table, be part of the task force, and it cannot be others of us making decisions on or speaking on behalf of them. We have to, it's hard to find the impacted groups, but we would not do ourselves a service to just run off, tick the boxes, think what we did the best we could do if we did not see many diverse
30
faces
seconds, Wei.
on the task force. So to the extent that the task force could become a longer term community organization that got the community involved, and especially, again, those voices that have been voiceless are really the ones that we need to encourage and make them know this is a safe place to help us to make a better city. So thank you very much for your good work, and I look forward to continuing to be part of the process.
I have a question real quick. Wait, do you know of any existing community groups who might be ones for us to talk to right off the bat?
Well, no, I don't. I was
Okay.
sort of racking my brains. I used to be at Sustainable Lafayette, and I do know that when they think of sustainability of a community, that they are trying to maybe pivot more away from just an environmental, but more holistic. What is a sustainable and diverse community and just community? And I believe there's discussions within that group of widening and getting more involved. But as far as groups that are not represented, I think that's really a challenge for our community. That's the problem. But I think we have to do the hard work to go reach out, because yeah, we have to do that work. Otherwise, I would feel like we've just gone through the motions. We'll spend a year going through the motions, and if nobody showed up at our really challenging us to our faces, then I think we might not have really quite done what we were supposed to do here.
Anyway, Teresa, do you have a question?
No, that was any thoughts on how to reach out and to make sure that we have as many opportunities. I've spoken with a number of people who want to be involved. It's providing that forum to feel safe, feel heard, and find ways that they can be of service to the community beyond, I mean, to be included. So thank you.
Yeah, one suggestion I had is that, so far the format has been everybody come here, but another format is we got to go there. So that means you go to the apartment complexes and you get into the common room there and you put posters the old fashioned way on the doors, right? And you say, Thursday night, where the mayor is coming down to have a meeting with us in our community here. And you go community by community in the apartment complexes, and the mayor's coming, vice mayor's coming, right, to hear us. And it's more work, but we got to go to those groups too, right? That not everybody will come to us.
Absolutely.
Great point.
Yeah.
Thank
you.
Yeah.
And I'm happy to go too, but I think our city officials, if they go, then the tone at the top sends the message. If your vice mayor is coming to your apartment complex, wow, let's go talk to her.
Okay.
Right?
And
Appreciate it.
And pre-COVID, we did with seniors and things like that, and people show up. So thank you. So we got to figure out our safe way with masks and things like that to do that, but agreed.
Yeah. Thank you very
Wei.
much. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Okay, we have one more hand up, and it's a telephone number ending in 373. If there's anyone else that would like to provide public comment, now would be a good time to raise your hand. All right, here is telephone number 373. Okay, caller, you are on.
Hello, this is
Hello.
Janine Crow. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Hi, Janine.
Okay. Hi. Well, I'm Janine Crow, and I live on Sweet Drive, and I've lived here in Lafayette all my life. I'm a senior citizen, and I was talking to a friend who is also a senior citizen, and she's looking for senior housing, and everything around, not just Lafayette, but I mean this whole area is like waiting lists to even have a chance to get into senior housing, and she's more on the low income side. And she grew up in Lafayette. She really would like to come back to Lafayette, but it's not too hopeful right now. So that would be something to think about. Is among other things, there's a lot of things on your plate about senior citizens being able to rent in Lafayette, or more availability for senior citizens to rent in Lafayette. I did want to ask a question. There's a planning. Let's see what number 9 planning. It says number B, letter B, change the zoning code, do away with single family housing, seek affordable housing, seek multifamily housing. Okay, I have a single family home. What are you going to do away with my home?
I can maybe jump in on that. I think the intent is very similar to a bunch of the state laws coming down from Sacramento. There was one that actually got defeated last night, and it would have been able to allow somebody to buy your property and split your lot into 2 lots.
But you're not going to force me to do that.
No, you would be selling your home, and the person buying it would do it. Does that make sense? Right.
Yes.
Right. And but in addition, what the laws that have been passed is that any person like you could put a second home called an accessory dwelling unit on your own property, and it can become rental property and be income for you. And that's another state law that came down that is kind of does the same thing, but without splitting your parcel in half. Does that help?
Yeah, there's somebody on up the street on Sweet Drive that has they put in there's a B. There's like their house number, and then there's a house number with a B, and there's like a driveway that goes to the back. I mean, I've never seen the back side of their property, but there's another. They built a house, and this has been a while. I mean, it isn't yesterday. They've done it. It's been there for some time.
So it does happen. It's they're far more than you think, actually.
So what if they could do it before? Then what is the new law that they want to do? If the people up the hill from me were able to do this in the past, why do we need a law to allow it when it was already allowed?
It would have
Just 30
allowed
more seconds on the topic.
Oh, no, it's okay if I'm asking questions. We can let her go on. So the law would say that it would not take a change of zoning by the city to allow that lot to be split. That's why they need the law.
Oh, the law. In other words, maybe these people on top of the hill, or farther up from me, it was maybe arranged between them and the city.
Yes.
And the city allowed it.
Correct.
Maybe. And then now the state would impose this and say, even if the city doesn't want it, the state says you must.
Correct.
Allow it.
Correct.
So it's taking power away from the city. The state is taking power away from the city if that passes.
Yes, and it did not pass last night. So just that did not happen.
It didn't pass. I see.
No.
Okay, well, thank you for explaining that. I didn't want my home to be taken away from me in my lifetime.
Totally fair.
Or either to my heirs. My heirs can do with it what they want, but I want to be able to do what I want with it.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Janine. Thank you for your question and also your concern and suggestion around housing for low-income seniors.
Okay, we do not have any, hold on. No, we do not have any more public speakers.
Perfect. All right. Thank you, all of you who raised your hand and shared your ideas and suggestions with us. Specifically, kind of to summarize, lots of ideas and suggestions around wanting to encourage the City Council and the task force to really focus on policies, thinking about how we can distribute and work in collaboration with community groups around the areas that they can take up versus the things only City Council has kind of purview over, encouragement around working in collaboration with the community as well and going out there to solicit ideas and hear feedback and really making sure that people who are impacted by systemic racism and discrimination are part of this process and conversation. And so at this point, we are going to allow the task force members to kind of take in all of the thoughts and suggestions, ideas, and questions that were shared through public comment, and then take a look at the implementation spreadsheet that Narup prepared to select some areas of short and long-term priorities. And so I'm going to share my screen really quick. And so in identifying the priorities, I'd like you to review the items marked yes under city purview in the implementation spreadsheet. And then taking a look at selecting 2 short-term actions and then 2 medium or long-term actions. And using kind of your basis for decision-making around, based on what you have seen and heard, based on the most common themes, and needs and challenges around systemic racism and discrimination, and also what the community has shared this evening. If given that Cam is not here, if we want to each give Teresa and Susan, if you want to select 3, we can do that as well.
Oh, appreciate that. Thank you, Tiffany.
Teresa has a question.
Absolutely. I can't, with your screen up, I can't tell if she has a question. So Teresa, please, I was going to ask you first if you want to go first and what your thoughts are.
Well, I have a question before I think both of us have done some of our 5 to 10 minute pick 2 before, but I appreciate the opportunity to do that. But I had a question related to, I didn't write earlier to ask you, Narup, to weigh in on a table of all of Michael's, recommendations or suggestions. But I was curious, just kind of off the top, about the 3 that he did bring forward. And thank you again, Michael, for narrowing to the ones that, narrowing again. So the one on, number 10, the policy about affordable housing units, and then the impact fee, and sort of where that fits in the short-term, long-term, and where does it go? I think we have, Susan and Vice Mayor Kendall, and I probably have ideas, but I'd love to hear that. And then his last on the pledge diversity, or the diversity inclusion.
Thank you. I think those 3 suggestions by Michael were really sound and good. And thank you, Michael, for submitting them. I'm just going to give you a couple of pros and cons, and I have not really had the time to go through all his recommendations, so please bear with me. The issue of allowing affordable housing offsite, the minuses are, as Michael indicated, it is separating them from us, and it is not. I think it doesn't comport well with our general plan. We're more of an inclusive community. Having said that, there are instances where I'll give you an example. We've had the developer purchase an apartment building across from the new project and income restrict some of those units as affordable, with the result that the apartment building is not 100% affordable. The affordable units are interspersed with market rate units. And the offsite, if I recall correctly, the city council can ask for twice as many affordable units as one can on site. So there are many factors that come into play. There are some absolute negatives, as Michael indicated. But if there are instances where there is a mixed income project in which some of the units are income restricted and distributed evenly amongst in the building, and we can get more units, we can get more affordable units that we can add to our affordable housing stock, that's a positive too. So I would my recommendation at the moment would be to ask that it be studied as part of the housing element update, because removing one part of the inclusionary housing is like removing a thread from a sweater. You don't know how it would affect other parts of the housing element. So it's a powerful statement to send, but it does have some downsides to it. The second one is absolutely any impact fee that we impose has to be accompanied by a nexus study that establishes the fee and makes sure that it's equitable across the board. So it's a cost that the city should be willing to undertake, whether separately or with the housing element update. Impact fee studies can run between 10 and 20,000 sometimes, depending on the complexity of the study. But it is, the concept itself is a really sound one, in that you are, and it's been done in other communities, that you charge an impact fee on all forms of housing, not only multifamily housing, so that that fee is used to build more affordable housing. It's a policy issue for council. Again, do you want to take that on ahead of the housing element update? I would say from the planning staff's perspective, it should be part of the housing element update as well. And finally, the pledge. I think it's a wonderful idea. I know that we've talked in the set of recommendations, considering a diversity policy that the city council will adopt, and this can very well be folded into that. It's a short-term issue in that staff, if we get the signal, the go-ahead from the council, we can prepare it within 1 month and come back to the council for adoption. So if the council agrees, I would recommend that this would be something that we would tackle as a short-term issue.
Okay, thank you. And so then did you have another, Susan? Or?
No, what other cities have that impact fee, just for my own research? Do you know?
I don't know off the top of my
Okay, that's fine.
So we could
No
find-
problem.
yeah.
No problem.
So now then we either go into our breakout rooms, Susan and I alone, and study, or we start discussing our.
I probably can just, I prefer to discuss it.
Yeah.
You can take a minute if you need to kind of like gather your thoughts before we share out, or if you're ready to.
I think if you're okay, Vice Mayor Kendall, I think that I'm happy to have look at adopting a diversity and non-discrimination policy be one of the things that we bring forward, or that you and I begin to discuss right now. And I think part of that ties into also the staff policies, HR, and the community pledge or city and staff pledge that I think would be incorporated in that sort of broader policy discussion. And I see staff nodding their heads. I don't want to make it so broad that but it does overlap a number of it shows that we as a city council, as a community, are committed to this. It is in alignment with what, even though Wei Tai pointed out, we haven't heard from the whole community, but what we have heard is that people would like us to move forward on those items that are both within our purview and that can begin to affect change. So that would be the first one that I would like to put out there. So
the only addition that I would say, it's like, let's put a pledge in there as well.
I think I said that, but
did you? Okay,
so throwing in community pledge, some HR policy review, how that fits into it, and then that that community staff, electeds, committees, all the pledge that Michael was also talking about. And thank you again, Michael, for even giving us some samples
Yes.
or a sample. So I'll pause there.
I 100% agree that that has to be something that we go straight at as soon as we can. I think that would be fabulous. It's not only symbolic, it actually it's a policy, and it will hopefully help set the tone. Like others are saying that we should set the tone from the top, and let's do that. Let's try to get something together. And thank you, staff, for being so willing to look into that and have that happen, you know, quicker rather than medium term. That would be great.
Great. Yeah, it seems short term, but it also is a process too. I mean, we're working with a lot of organizations, you know, and they're like, let's review HR policies and practices. And sure, there are lots of policies around explicit discrimination, but when it's unconscious, implicit bias and discrimination too, it's a whole other beast on how do you develop policies to both hold people accountable and also take into consideration learning and blind spots. But it's definitely an area of purview in terms of city and staff areas that can, you know, really affect change long term and immediately. So it sounds like both of you are in this in alignment with that short term goal or objective.
Yes.
Awesome. So non-discrimination policy, responsive, preventative, and also community, staff, commission, task force, elected officials pledge.
Yes.
Awesome. All right. Long term then.
That was one. Do we have another?
I know.
Yeah, another
I'm
one?
like, wait a minute. No.
Okay, yes.
No, both of us. Wait, we want, no, go ahead, Susan. I'm sorry.
No, you can take, you go ahead. You start.
Well,
Okay.
go ahead.
So
we'll
the other,
alternate because I have a feeling that some of them are going to be similar.
right. The training, I'm a big fan of, if we can get that UC, I figured, right? If we can look at the UC Berkeley, and if it's free, let us push that out as far and wide as we can push that. That would be really wonderful. And on these, somebody had said, let's make sure that we get a way to get feedback, some monitor our results on this one. So as we do this, let's make sure that there's some sort of feedback loop so we can understand how many people in the community are doing this, where, and then somehow get feedback about it, make it a true community effort. So it'll have to have like a portal or something for people to come back and respond to. That's how I would try to implement that. Yeah, Teresa.
So absolutely agree. It was the next one. I figured we were probably so one of the things, and I did talk just briefly to Narup, and appreciate that the UC online training is laying a foundation, sort of a where are we all starting basis for us. And then I don't know if, and this may come back out into how we do additional community outreach, but I think that the sort of benefits of some of that training, maybe the next step is having another town hall or forum, hopefully in person sooner rather than later, that actually has us, even if I guess it's Zoom, but has us face to face, because I think that there's a lot of learning in that connection. So we all just decide that we start at this baseline and then we come back together and go on that next step. So this is a foundation. And I'm sure Tiffany has facilitated ways to do all of that. But I think this online is a first step. And then the schools, at one of our meetings, one of our sessions, we talked about, having it be some targeted staff, council, commissions, schools, our police officers, however we do all of that, and then that community at large. So I think I'm making it again bigger, but I think having that goal in mind, that it's sort of community and inclusive.
So Tiffany, you'd mentioned, I totally agree, Teresa, that Tiffany had mentioned there's like a test or something afterwards. Does this training at the end kind of have a test part of it or not? Or Tiffany,
I'm not sure. The test, the implicit association test that I think me and Narup were talking about was, it's by Harvard. It's free. You can take it and you kind of choose a social identity and group, and you have to take this really quick test, and it shows you where your blind spots are, or areas of your brain where it takes longer or a lag to associate different identities with good or bad. But I that could be a follow-up in terms of like a community, like Teresa was saying, community learning or discussion plan where, you know, like this is our initiative, everybody take this training, we come back into a larger space to have discussions, reflect, share. And it sounds like that might be kind of like a learning plan almost for the whole community, a series. Yeah.
I had a friend described to me, and it really struck me well, was that we're all on the spectrum somewhere, right? And we just want to move everybody just you know, as much as we can, even if it's just a little, but we're all moving in the same direction no matter where we start, right? And I understand that makes sense to me, and as a goal is just try to get, you know, some awareness and move everybody in the same direction together. It would be really wonderful.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you're all building a common language together. That's what it is.
Right.
Yeah. And you have to also imagine that prior to this, you know, this talking about bias and diversity and racism wasn't a conversation. So it's a huge leap you all are taking, which is amazing. And it's going to take some learning and knowledge and awareness and just continued conversation. So that in of itself is a huge but also monumental commitment. All right. Did you both get a chance to share short term?
We did. Yeah.
Teresa, do
Were
you
there
have something?
So I should follow the process. I will follow the process. So my next was not to jump all the way to the end, but the Wei Tai, I think, touched on it, and maybe some others did as well, but that sort of next step, and I know we're going to talk about that in the next bullet point, but as we prioritize, I would look at that, what the makeup of this committee looks like, you know, as we go forward, and that continuing to get input, and maybe it's through this implicit bias training. So I'll hold for the process.
No, I think we're done. I mean, I think that this is the next thing we should probably discuss, right? Unless you want to discuss long term.
Yeah,
Yeah.
But
Okay.
I think it's relevant in there, right? I mean, it's a relevant thing as part of our long term outlook is to think of that. And so, do you want to talk about how you envision it, or would you like me to start?
I think we should identify the short-term action items first, long-term ones, because that might include things like housing or policies, right?
Yes.
And that will inform structure long-term at the end of it. So there might be a number of different structures in which this task force evolves, is what I'm starting to hear, but we'll get to that point. Yeah.
So I'm happy you touched on it, Tiffany, in terms of, and I like that you said the short-term action steps for the medium and long-term goals, if you will. So on housing, I really appreciate, and somebody said, oh, thank you all for putting this together. And as Vice Mayor Kandel said at the beginning after the reports, the community did this, right? The community shared these with us. And then thank you to Tiffany and Narup for summarizing them, putting them together. And then as Wei Tai said, a part of the community did this, but this is community driven and is the beginning of a process that we're embarking on. But on policy issues. And I want to say again, the policing obviously is continuing ongoing work. It's short-term, medium, and long-term. And so to everyone's comment, thank you to the public safety group for working on that. I want to talk about housing and how all of that fits in the general plan and the housing element. And so I think, Nirup, you laid it out here in terms of which things can fit into the housing element. So I think coming back as one of our discussion items with the council is to really agree on which things we want to lift up to come back. And so whether it's impact fees, you know, a discussion of rent control. I've read some of the same studies and just today heard something about, you know, why those aren't necessarily good. But all of the items within that housing block, if not all, I mean, we can't do all of them, but if we could have that discussion at the council level, I think that that's important. I think the disabilities and our senior population, thank you, Janine, for bringing it up and for others previously. So I'd like us to have an agreement on short-term steps in the housing piece. And also part of the housing, but part of values is the McCarty bill. So it's the McCarty, it's a series of legislators. Assemblymember McCarty, I believe, is the first to have brought it out, but Assemblymember Chu, Senator Wiener, and I think a couple of others have signed on, or they're part of a group that's putting the language together and we'll bring it forward as the new session starts. So I would very much like us to follow that. I've done some research on how we as a community, we as a county, we as individuals can get rid of those covenants, and really the most cost-effective, far broad sweeping way to do that is through legislation. So I really would love us to have that come back. And I know that Councilmember Bliss and Councilmember Burks, as part of the legislation committee, will do that. So on housing, I would look to staff on how we break this up and bring it back, but I would love us to have that discussion come back.
Great. So Teresa, you're just naming housing as the long term. The specifics still need to be worked out, but that is a big area in terms of undoing the structural racism in Lafayette.
Yes, and affordable and all of those things. And they're all, and I think it all wraps up in housing element, or most of it, but to begin that discussion and prioritizing those. Thank you.
Right, and I thank you, Teresa. And I also completely agree. In addition, the short-term part of the housing issue is that we are trying to go out and get people to be part of our GPAC, our General Plan Action Committee. And it is going to be actually a multi-year process, most likely. And we are taking active steps right now to figure out how to get underrepresented communities to be a part of this process. And so we're working on a way to weight the different groups possibly in order to hopefully we'll get their participation boosted. And so that is our short term, and we're very much already in that process. And we're hopefully that, when is that coming back to us soon? It's
I don't know when it's coming back to you. I think they were scheduled to kick off the GPAC process in October. And this month is spent just preparing for the publicity and inviting people to join in.
right. So that's our short-term action
Yes.
to address that. Yes, and I think that's so wonderful. And of course the long-term items are mostly going to be tied into our general plan update, and we just have to be very cognizant during that entire process to make sure that we are listening to these underrepresented groups and really reach out and try to get them to weigh in as best as we can. So council just, okay, yeah. And to make this clear, council is really actually not part, really, we don't drive the general plan action committee. We actually, that's in Europe. We're not
Correct.
on the commission, right, on the committee. And so these are all community members. I mean, they really, really drive this. And so it is really important to get people onto that because they're the drivers, not council in this case. So it's a wonderful opportunity. And I hope everybody listening is listening and their ears are going, yeah, maybe I want to be part of this. So please, at least look at it and look for it soon, and we'll be sending it out to everybody.
Mhm.
All right, Nirup.
And I just wanted to clarify what Councilmember Geringer said, that one category is housing, and the housing policies not only identified in the spreadsheet, but also the two that Michael raised this evening. We'll bring it back to the full council for a review, and the council can have a discussion about it. I suspect the council will want us to study all of it, but that's up to you. You may want to rank it, but you want to bring it back as a block, so to speak.
Yes, and I think that as we look at Michael's, because some of the things that are in Michael's would also, I believe, to Vice Mayor Kendall's point, could go to the general plan advisory committee as they begin their work and look at which elements beyond the elements that are required, which ones might be added, and in terms of a diversity, or how do we weave that all through. So there are a lot of things in here that obviously I think the whole council should look at and weigh in on, but definitely just want to make sure that those are short-term steps towards these longer-term goals for the community.
Mhm. Great, thank you. I agree.
Great.
So that is that's like one long term, and the other one is probably how we want to move this forward. Or is that part? Or do you have another long term one that you want to include, Teresa?
I think those are the big ones, and then it does come down to how do we facilitate the continued discussion? How do we make sure that the other groups, not make sure, I can already hear the schools folks saying, wait a minute, what are you making sure that we can collaborate with all of the other groups, in town who are doing this work to implement some of the things that are not within our purview. So sharing that information. And then I do think we're getting to that point of what does that look like? And
Yes.
yeah.
So just to clarify, the long term was broadly around housing and just investigating more, really understanding those different pieces, chunking it out, prioritizing. And then also the covenants, also the housing ones, is that separate or within?
I think actually now that you say it out loud, it's really kind of all the pieces that will go through general plan but it's the housing, zoning, and planning categories that I think came up in the comments I don't think there are here that you summarized. So it's really all of those things. And
Okay.
some of those are picked up in Michael Cass's, recommendations. And that came up in the conversation or public comment as well. So it's that broad bucket.
Perfect. Housing, planning, and zoning.
Mhm.
Great. And then the short term, the ideas were specifically around anti-discrimination policies and pledges. Also around, where are my notes?
Training. The
Training. Yes,
Yeah.
the UC Berkeley training and scoping it out in terms of like a community initiative and process. Also having like a feedback loop around, the impact of this training and work together. And then as a short term, as part of the housing, having the conversation within city council, housing, planning, zoning, and encouraging participation in the GPAC, General Planning Action Committee.
Yes.
And then I have one more,
Yeah.
one more clarifying. So on that, and I'm going to probably look at Narup, but within that, that diversity and discrimination policy development, how that relates to staffing and HR policies, that was noted in there. And when I did my little bullets here under adopting that policy, I did have a sub-bullet, that is specifically related to staffing and sort of HR. And that may be too much for one short-term goal, but I didn't want us to lose it. So if it goes in a parking lot, it's still within our purview. And it looks like we picked up most of the other things that are directly in our purview. And I just don't want to lose that.
Thank you. I agree that getting into HR policies and going through our personnel rules and making sure that we refresh them will take, it's not a short-term task, it's a medium-term task, but that can be part of your overall policy, a commitment to do that, so that it's recognized that that we will undertake it. May I also suggest that as part of one, that the city join the Government Alliance for Race and Equity. It's $1,000 a year, and it's a marvelous resource for staff to meet with staff members from across the nation on topics of diversity and equity. And I think it'll enrich staff's, the services that we offer staff.
Sounds great. Thank you.
Thank
All
you.
right. Adding GARE into the short term, and then also in the long term, there's some short term in terms of staffing, like the pledges, and then medium long term, which is the HR policies and practices. Great. So now then that we've established some of these priorities, the next part is the objectives, the fun part, the structure, the themes. So let's go ahead and move into that piece. That will be more towards brainstorming. All right. So we've identified our priorities. So structure and name. All right. So the goal here is now we're clarifying our objective.
Tiffany,
Yes.
one second.
Mhm.
I think so just for clarity, Teresa, I think both you and I think I'm listening to it, that we don't think that the city should be in charge of the community effort as a whole long term. So there's these three ways that the city can be in charge of this. We can either lead it forever, we can be a partner with a group, or we can support a group, right? And so those are kind of different ways that Jennifer said earlier that was really well done when we spoke earlier. And I'm just kind of trying to see what you think of where the city's role is, long term.
And what was your so we could lead it forever.
Right, right. And so,
and what was the second one?
We can
I'm gonna go ahead
partner.
and share screen right here. So
Okay, there you go. She's gonna lead us down.
Thank you.
The task force supports a community-led initiative to accomplish the goals. So somebody else is driving, but your participation, your using your leverage, your power, your privilege to support these goals. The second is the task force partners with a community initiative or organization to accomplish the goals. So around collaboration. And then the third is the task force leads completely this work to accomplish the goals with community participation. Now, these are just some ideas. Jennifer shared these with us. However, it also sounds like we might split based on the priorities, right, or the objectives in terms of like there's HR policies, there's a community-led education plan that you all are talking about, doing this implicit bias training and coming back together. There's also the pieces around housing, zoning, planning. And so there might be different formats in which each of these take place. So for instance, the housing, I mean, that could be, the task force leads it with getting participation and involvement with the community in regards to the piece around, staff policies and practices for the city. That might be the task force also leading it. The other pieces around, actually, those are the big ones. Okay, I'll stop talking and let you all discuss.
Tiffany, I had no idea you created an actual picture of where we were going. I thought we were going directly to the name. And so that's why I cut you off, and I totally apologize. This is
no worries.
Lovely.
So are there other facilitated, is there another slide? So if you could go through your lead in to what we're going to discuss,
yes.
Or is that it?
So I was going to ask you all what questions you have, and then also see if the community had recommendations also, which some of them already started to share, but we can also open it back up.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you, Vice Mayor Kendall, for, broaching what Jennifer had suggested, these suggestions and options. I think I would like to hear back from the community, but kind of just in response, just clarifying to what you said, Tiffany, in terms of a lot of the things that we talked about for short term, those are really leaning, at least they seem to be leaning toward, they fit within our city kind of structure already. So as Vice Mayor Kendall pointed out, a lot of the items or recommendations that can help us continue to move forward, building a more inclusive community related to housing and possibly zoning, and some values will be included in, or all values will be included in the general plan process and the development of the housing element. So for me, part of the task force, so I do want to hear from the community, because some of the parts are really about so even banners, we have a banner committee, subcommittee that exists to look at banners, and we have an art committee to look at public art. And so a lot of those things fit within the existing structure. I think what we started here, and what is great, is that beginning the dialogue and the conversation, and making sure that people feel heard and know how to have their voices heard. And so as Wei Tai said, that some of that involves us going out in the community, scheduling, putting up banner flyers and door hangers saying, hey, we're going to be, the vice mayor and the mayor are going to be in the common room at, whatever time. So some of that also feels community driven, and having a community task force. And a number of our structures include having 2 council members, usually, this time was different, but be part of that liaison to a group that I guess will lead us to the question of, is it a city appointed ad hoc, or advisory committee, or is it a task force? Anyway, so I'm, in getting into those, it's kind of that question of how does it fit into our existing structure, but with the goal of making sure that we're doing all the community outreach pieces of it as well, to get the input back in on our policy making and decisions that will come through the general plan and all those other things, programs. So public comment would be good, but that was just kind of my stream of consciousness on this.
Yeah.
Okay, well, go ahead, sorry.
Yeah. You're muted.
early on in this process, we met with a citizen, I should say, a community-driven organization called the San Ramon Valley Diversity Coalition. And this is a group that represents people who live in the San Ramon Valley area. And it is a group that is outside the city structure, but they invite the city to participate in their monthly meetings. And what we learned was that they were quite happy not being controlled by the city in a way. And I'm just looking at their website, their Facebook page. Their group serves as a catalyst to create solutions to build a community of inclusion and equity. So I think that fits in model 1 that Tiffany posted. I just wanted to give you an example, a real life example of that.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Susan, do you have comments or questions? Otherwise, we can move to the public comment.
Right. I don't have a lot of, I do want to hear from people if they've got anything to contribute at this point. We might have to have some hybrid, for a while as we muddle through this. So please, please, if anybody has any comments to say, please feel free to raise your hand, and we'd love to hear from you.
All right. So if you do want to provide public comment, go ahead and use the raise your hand function.
Just say one more thing really quickly. And just for a point of clarification, we could have, as Vice Mayor Kendall just said, a couple of hybrid options to take back to council, the full council, and the full council will be discussing this as well. So we're not necessarily tied to, we're not tied tonight to having a final model.
Thank you.
All right, so
I was going to say one more. Sorry, Jeff. Nur, can you clarify, Nur, the different, like the possibilities, like ad hoc advisory committee versus task force versus?
Well, regardless of what we call committees, if it's a city committee, it has to follow certain rules and regulations about how to conduct a meeting. The meetings have to be publicly noticed. They usually require staff to post agendas. And so whether it's an ad hoc committee or a task force or a commission or a blue ribbon task force, if it's under the city umbrella, we usually follow all the Brown Act rules and regulations, unless it's a very short-term task. So if you want to step away from the city umbrella, it would be something that the community develops on its own and forms a group to address issues that we are about which we're talking today. So it can be totally independent. As Vice Mayor Kendall said, there may be a period of time where they overlap so that the city helps them launch, so to speak. But the San Ramon group is entirely independent of the city.
Thank you, Nuru. All right, Jeff.
All right, well, let's try it now. Okay, there's the hands are back up. So if you do want to make public comment, please use the raise your hand function or *9. First up, we have Michael Cass, followed by Jeremy Levine, and telephone number 373. Here comes Michael Cass.
Welcome back.
Hi again, everyone. So I appreciate you having the discussion about what to do from an ongoing basis. I think you made a lot of decisions already tonight, so I caution you with making a decision about what the framework of the task force or whatever it's going to be going forward. What I would actually encourage you to do is kind of commit to tabling it for 6 months, bring this group back together and just kind of see from a grassroots standpoint what happens in the community. because there are so many other conversations that are already happening right now. Plus there's an ability to report back. I get a report back from staff on what progress has been made with the direction that you've provided this evening, without overly burdening staff at this point in time. What I would encourage you to do above and beyond that, as Councilmember Geringer mentioned, there are a number of existing commissions and committees that are already in place. What I would encourage you to do in the interim, when you have those annual check-ins, for instance, when the Public Art Committee does their annual check-in, ask the question, what are you as a committee doing to address diversity and inclusion? And see what they've done over the last few months. And if they haven't done anything, challenge them to have a conversation amongst their group in the area that they have purview for what ideas they have. Thank you.
Thanks, Michael. Yeah, it sounds like around this, having the task force and council really promote a sense of accountability, both with staff and the committees and commissions that exist, and giving the community some time to organize and plan and step up also before kind of setting a structure for everything. Thanks, Michael.
Thank you.
Okay, coming up next, we have Jeremy Levine, followed by telephone number 373. Here comes Jeremy now. We know he knows how to operate that thing. Go ahead, Jeremy.
Welcome back, Jeremy. It might just be Zooms.
I think this happened last time, right? When we were going to put him back as an account. See, there you go. All right.
All right. Hello again. I really wanted to second what Michael said about taking time with this decision. The community's civil society is in a state of flux, I would say, and it's always changing, of course. But new groups have popped up in the past few months, and the conversation is evolving, and different people are getting involved to different amounts. But I don't actually think that's particularly unique. This task force will always have an evolving role because such is the nature of racial equality and the ongoing process that we are undergoing to create a just world. I do think that among the three options, number 2 seemed like a long-term sustainable option. It said partner with a organization, which I think is, I mean, if there's a organization that captures the world of diversity, a true coalition, I would love to see that. But I think even it's like doesn't have to be a single organization. It could be a suite of organizations that maybe aren't yet in the coalition, but this group actually has an opportunity not just to facilitate a coalition of whatever groups are trying to promote inclusivity, but to facilitate a certain amount of public discourse from every part of Lafayette. What the council was discussing and what Michael Cass brought up, you have an opportunity to go speak to all kinds of people in Lafayette. What Weitai brought up, to go directly to communities, and you have an authority that no one else in the community has. You can vote on policy, some of the members of this task force, and you can bring the conversations from the community directly back to the council and implement people's desires in policy in a way that most people aren't even aware of. Most people don't know what all the policies are. They don't know what the city's powers are. They don't know what the, research says are the best options.
30 seconds, Jeremy.
Thank you. They're just going about their lives. And so I think the second option, that the partnering with community organizations, but still taking a kind of leadership role that involves using the powers you have before you to affect the most change. I think this council's name is City Council Task Force to Affect Change and Action in the Area of Racial Equality. City Council, affect change. Those are the words.
Thank
So
you, Jeremy.
thank you.
Yeah. Yes, thank you for echoing Michael's points and also broadening number 2 around the task force partners with a group or kind of a conglomerate of different community organizations to help to utilize its power and privilege to affect change and continue the public discourse and discussion around these ongoing and huge topics. Where it's not going to happen overnight or in 1 year or 2 or 5. It's ongoing. So thank you.
Righty. If there's anyone else that would like to provide public comment, please do so now. You can raise your hand or use *9. And we do have one hand up, and that is telephone number 373, who will be joining now.
Hello, this is Janine Crow.
Welcome, Janine.
Can you hear me?
Yep, you're on.
Okay. I was curious if you have spoken to the city councils of Orinda and Moraga, and if you could, if you haven't, if it's possible, I mean, are they having the same conversations? Could it be like a greater community working together between the 3 cities in La Morinda? And then the other question I have is, what about the have you talked to the churches and the clubs? What are they like, the Kiwanis Club and although the social clubs? I forget what the official name is for all these clubs, but there's different ones like the Kiwanis Club. And there's churches and maybe others, and the Temple Isaiah and different community, other parts of the community that might want to participate in some way in enhancing or improving things in our community. I know at my church in Orinda we had guest speakers when we could have guest speakers, which we can't right now, but we've had guest speakers. There was a rabbi that spoke and a Buddhist, well, I'm not sure what they call them, Buddhist priest, I'm sorry. And then there was, we had a speaker who was Muslim, and we had a speaker, some Christian speakers, and different denominations, different groups. And there was quite a bit of interest. I mean, it varied. Not every group, not every speaker had as much interest as others, but still, it seemed like there was some interest in presenting, I guess, diverse ideas to the community. And I don't know if that's some resource that the groups outside of civic groups, that like clubs and churches, if they could help and might want to be interested in helping.
Thank you, Janine.
You're welcome.
Thank
Yeah.
Thank you.
Sounds like Janine had questions around if the task force has spoken to other cities in Orinda, Moraga, and if we've reached out to different churches and clubs and social clubs and things yet.
I have not. It is absolutely on the list to do. So I totally agree with you, Janine, on this one.
And I think through our communications, Teresa here, Janine, thank you for that input. I think through the communications out about the meetings that a number of our faith-based organizations within the community are on those lists. And so are getting that. And as Vice Mayor Kandel said, we can do more active communications as we move forward.
Great.
Okay, we've got one
yeah.
more public speaker. So Wei Tai Kwok will be joining the meeting now.
Hi there. Okay, so if the question is a great conversation so far, and really the question of how do we structure ourselves moving forward down the road, it seems like we're currently like in option 3, which is the city led and the community is helping along. And maybe over time we could migrate to number 2, where I think after we get more and more momentum and get more and more churches and service groups and others involved in this task force work, then the momentum in the community is there. You've lit the fire in the community. You've set the tone. You've set the direction, the vision. We see that many people are involved and it's going someplace, and then naturally a handoff to like option 2 seems to happen. But I think it's probably too early. It feels too early to do that now, because I don't feel like we have enough momentum, interest, buy-in. And so really appreciate that our city 5-0 vote, that we have a city council and a staff so committed to this important topic that is somewhat unprecedented. So I sort of feel like you guys are doing great. Just go with it a bit longer and build up more momentum and interest, and let's go make it happen and put the fire under the community to make it happen. Don't go away too early. Otherwise, I think, there's not much out there right now. Even on this call, how many callers are there, right? So I think we got to really go get more stakeholders involved. And so keep at it a little bit longer, and then we'll get others to take over. Thank you.
I appreciate it, White Tie, the encouragement and the excitement and the enthusiasm. And I feel like at the end of each conversation, you're pulling it all together. But it sounds like we don't want to move away too soon or act too quickly. But where we're at right now is, like you're saying, we're leading the work, but eventually where we want to get to is handing off the work and just following suit with the rest of the community. Thank you.
Thank you.
If I could, just to
go
Wei
for
Tai's
it.
comment about how there aren't very many people here tonight, there's at least one big presentation going on in the school community. So I think there is some draw away from us. And so we're committing also to make sure we check every calendar before we go forward so that we can have those voices. But I think that's part of the draw tonight. So, but thank you for your comments.
There's about 20 as I'm monitoring it, yeah.
All right, we do not have any more public comment at this time.
Okay, so I think to summarize, it sounds like a mix of different public comments around don't make decisions too soon. Let's kind of do a wait and see, and what kind of community organizations or groups kind of step up or kind of surface. And then also looking at, maybe what we're doing right now is just kind of setting the tone and leading the work, but eventually the long-term goal is handing it off. But I'll open it up to you both, Susan and Teresa, about your thoughts around structure and naming. I think it was also Jeremy who says we don't need to change our name. The name is exactly what we're doing. So that's another thought also.
Thank you, Tiffany, again. And thank you everybody for letting us know how you feel. It does. If we just stopped right now, it would be an orphan, and that really would be unfortunate, because it doesn't have the kind of push like you're talking about. We need to establish that push with our policy and our pledges and our education and everything that our short-term stuff. We need to get that launched, of course, and put some heat behind it. The outreach to the other areas, what I'm seeing is that, yeah, we really, really want to have something like eventually like the San Ramon group, very well run organization, and they're literally all Black leaders, they're mostly Black. And I think that is a community that we are trying to, along with all the other communities going around, that is very underrepresented in the Lafayette. And we might want to reach out to the other cities, because we may need to reach out to all of La Miranda in order to get a quorum, a critical mass there that will be able to push forward. And so I think that's a good idea. And so that'll be on us to do in this short term as well. Outside of, we don't need staff to do that. That would be more like on Teresa and I, and do that in order not to push on staff too hard. So I agree. I don't think we can do that right now, but I don't know, Teresa, what are you thinking?
No, I agree. And the piece that I think really brings it home is that there's not an obvious group of individuals who are doing this work. And in conversations that I've been having in the community, some around how do we get to people so they know, I think it was Jeremy who said most people don't even know kind of what the city council's doing, or, you know, hopefully there aren't very many, no, I'm kidding. But getting the word out, and that is on us to, you know, make those calls to people who have come in these meetings and made comments or written on our surveys, and to personally outreach. I think Councilmember Burks talked about that as well. And I did want to say to Michael Cass that in our interviews with Senior Commission and another one that I was on with Councilmember Burks, he did specifically ask questions around how the commission can work toward diversity and inclusion. So he was channeling his inner Michael Cass's voice there. And, you know, we are trying to move, I think, in the right direction. So I agree that, and I'm looking at staff, that I agree we need to, as the city council, to affect change, and the very long name, continue to do this work. I don't know how many months that is. Our next step is to bring this discussion back to the full council, and we can, you know, offer and get input, offer them this update and then get input from them as well. But I think that we have momentum and we should continue it with the goal of also reaching out to people. I was trying to look for a quote that someone whom I spoke with said, finding ways to make, as Lafayette evolves, to make it inviting for people to feel heard and to be of service to the community. And so new people who've been here, people who've been here for a long time who don't feel disenfranchised, or for whatever reason don't feel that they can get involved because, well, it's already kind of running and there are people on those, that we need to be proactive in that and informing this task force as well. And then if I could just quickly, the other piece of that is Tiffany, I don't know if you were on the email thread, but we did get a comment or a public comment today from a community member who wanted to make sure that we didn't lose sight of racial discrimination, all the forms of othering or disenfranchisement. And so as we go forward, making sure, I mean, race is at the forefront, but we're really focusing on inclusion for every person in Lafayette for whatever reason, ability, race, sexual orientation, and I'm going to forget something as I go through, but just know religious discrimination, just making sure that everybody knows these conversations are around every resident in the community for whatever reason that we might feel other. So I agree, we continue with the committee, the task force.
Great.
Great. Excuse me, I agree. Thank you. So I guess the thought would be, Teresa, between you and me, the thought would be we would coalesce all these results, we bring it back to council with the understanding that in order for us to pull away, we have to achieve enough that it can live on its own, and a commitment to make sure that we do that. And I'm sorry, we're going to try not to take too much staff time, right? This is one that it really does take, you know, us as leaders, right? We should be making a lot of these calls to try to figure this out, because this is hard. It's something that staff, it's weird. It's one of those topics that staff can do, but it would be so much more powerful if council does it and our leaders do it. So I think a pledge or some sort of conversation with the rest of council to see how they feel about that as well. I would like to do that.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I think it's a multi-pronged approach. You know, like in order to change these systems, it requires everybody because it lives in all of us. We're all enacting, you know, we're all part of the system. It may require the council to set the tone and the priorities, but the staff to execute it. And the staff is the one that creates the medium for the council to do its work also. And there's a lot. Everybody is, I think, a part of this work.
Mhm.
Yeah. Narup and Jennifer, did you want to speak to any part of what Teresa was saying about the kind of the commitment or kind of the next steps timeline?
Go ahead, Jennifer.
I think we have some clear direction, and I take from this that Narup and I will start with an outline of what we can take to council, what we can share with the full council from this meeting, and we'll take it from there.
Okay.
So thank you. So one more item that was on our agenda, and it may be that we table it as well or bring it, back to the council, but was to establish a name and objective for the task force. We have a name, that seems to be anyway. That seems to. I think it's long. I never, I might.
It's long.
Equity and inclusion task force is kind of my placeholder and things, but I don't know if we just want to wait and work on the other things and leave the name, people know what it is. That my only kind of thing about it is that it very clearly is racial equality, and so to that whole point about all of the ways that discrimination, explicit or implicit, happens to other folks. And so I don't know if we wanted to change it because for that reason. And then in terms of objectives, just in looking at a number of them, one thing is I think the title we have right now is an objective, but it's a loosely very terse, concise, not terse, concise objective. But, there are other, I don't know if we want to spend the time right now looking at the objective. I did look at a couple from other cities that, maybe that what we're trying to do. So it's an agenda item. I just thought we should talk about it before we go.
Yes. I sent those names that I thought that we had talked about before to you, Tiffany. Did you get those?
Let me pull it up. I just noticed that I didn't add it to the slides. But you can keep talking and I can pull it up right now.
I could try to pull it up as well.
So I don't know, Susan, if you were talking about from the, I pulled several of them from our first meeting.
That was what I did too.
Yeah.
And sent them. Yeah.
And
okay,
then
so
somebody,
go
ahead.
Diversity and equality in Lafayette, equity Lafayette, diversity and inclusion Lafayette.
Equity and inclusion, because I remembered we got some, not pushback, but a little bit from one of the members of the school committee who, said that diversity and equality, different, things, but and we were pointed out that we were going toward marketing with Equity Lafayette or
exactly.
Yeah.
That was, yes.
But somebody sent me a text and just throwing it out there, the Lafayette loves, we have Love Lafayette, but really it's an outward bound emotion as well. And it would fit on our bumper stickers. No, but anyway, I'm sure that person's on YouTube right now. But anyway, if we go down to branding, I think those are some of the ones, and that was the Equity Lafayette. Frankly, I think one of the statements that does, and this is not, intended to have anybody change it from what they're using, but Inclusive Lafayette, I think I mentioned at the very first that, there's a Facebook page and group, a very active group now that has that title. But Equity and Inclusion Task Force, to me, includes all of the inclusion that we're and equity that we're trying to do without anyway, just a thought. Also happy to just keep with the one we have.
Do you and I go ahead.
Oh, here's a few
Mhm.
that we were just brainstorming as staff also. Task Force on Racism and Discrimination, kind of just like calling it out.
Mhm.
Racism being like we're looking at racial inequities, but discrimination encompassing all other social identities.
Okay.
Also knowing that race is like a huge part and intersection of all of these,
Yeah.
you know, others. Task Force for Equality and Diversity. To some of your points, there is a big difference, I think, in terms of equality and equity. Equality is like, both are alluding to fairness, but equality is, I'm gonna be fair by giving everybody the same thing. Everybody gets one chip.
Yeah.
I must be hungry. Equity being, I'm going to be fair by acknowledging what people's starting points are, potential disadvantages that they might be starting off with, and then allocating resources and support based on what the starting points are of the individuals or the communities that you are looking to support. So it could be Task Force for Equality and Diversity, or perhaps Task Force for Equity and Diversity, Task Force to End Structural Racism and Discrimination. Those are just some of the ideas.
Mhm.
So you avoided the word inclusion. Is there any?
No, I might have just left it out in terms of the brainstorming. That could be an area too.
Right, because that seems to get, the inclusion part does, to me at least, makes it broader, right? It includes all groups, and it's not just, Black groups or religious groups. So inclusion, it does seem like it goes more in a direction that I think, and that's what Teresa has mentioned as well. So the Task Force of Equity and Inclusion.
That could be an option. If I was able to edit this live, I would edit it for sure.
Got it. But does that get at the core of this initial push, which was to help end structural racism, right? And that I don't know if we would be veering away from that, and that does make me concerned.
Mhm.
So racism.
So are you thinking, Susan, or are you?
No, go ahead.
Oh,
Keep
okay.
going.
So that to Tiffany's point about the Task Force on Racism and Discrimination, I think that it does, it concisely goes to racism, and we could put structural racism, but racism and discrimination. And so discrimination does pick up what happens to what I was trying to capture, with inclusion. And I think it's very succinct and says what it is that we're doing. Yeah.
So let's bring that back as number one.
Okay.
And then so I don't like the second one because it's equality, like Tiffany says, it should be equity, right?
Mm-hmm.
And keep that into structural racism. But I also think we should put this other one in there that we both mentioned first, just to let council weigh in on it, is the Task Force for Equity and Inclusion.
Yeah. And do we want to, well, we can look at some objective language, but.
Go ahead, yeah. So is that clear? So we can bring them, but you can rank them. So we could, Task Force on Racism and Discrimination would be number one. And then maybe Task Force for Equity and Diversity is number two.
Or Equity and Inclusion, which one?
Oh, why don't we make it Equity and Inclusion, and then the end structural racism. Perfect. Then you have all three. Yeah.
Not to throw more in the mix, but you could also say task force. If you don't want to make it seem like we're a task force for racism and discrimination, it could also be Task Force to End Racism or Discrimination. But then again, that's a lot of words. So you could also say Task Force, like anti-racism and discrimination task force. That makes it, 4 words.
I'm okay with the on. I think I think it's well known enough that people won't be clear, but task force and then 4 for the equity and diversity, or inclusion. Yeah. I like that.
And yeah.
Okay. Great. So it sounds like these will be the 3, I can summarize this, and I'm sure Jennifer and Narup have this down too, but the Task Force on Racism and Discrimination, Task Force for Equity and Inclusion, Task Force to End Structural Racism will be options to share back with City Council as a next step as well.
Yeah, perfect.
Great. All right, and then objective was the other piece. So the objective could be what the name is now, like you're saying, like to effect a change and action on racial equality with some slight tweaks. I think that would allow the task force to continue to evolve and take on different priorities. Like maybe they're starting with the pledge and the policies and practices and also housing. Moving forward, it could be, diversifying, upholding community accountability when it comes to racism, or diversifying businesses, whatever it is that would allow you some flexibility. Yeah, what are your thoughts?
Teresa, you had the thought on that first. So.
Oh, you're on mute, Teresa.
Almost made it through the whole meeting.
No, I know.
The mute. Yes, I think just to our point about in the area of racial equity and discrimination in Lafayette, changing out the equality. And not to wordsmith the whole. I think it says what we're trying to do. And as you said, it can evolve as we go forward.
Okay. So keeping the objective around affecting change and action around racial equity in Lafayette.
Can we add?
Oh, yeah, I was going to say and discrimination, just because I think are putting it in the title. Or yeah.
Okay. Susan, were you going to say the same thing or something different?
Yes, we have to make it broader than just the racism. And I just want to make sure that we include something in there to indicate that. Yeah.
Great. All right, so we have 3 name options. We have an objective that's all encompassing, that is also very targeted around affecting change and action around racial equity and discrimination in Lafayette. We also have short-term goals and priorities, which is getting staff to look at policies and practices with HR, to do a pledge and commitment around anti-discrimination for staff, committees, commissions, and also elected officials. We also have in that short-term plan having, where do we have that? UC Berkeley training and planning out almost like a community education plan that starts with the training, comes back into like a larger town hall or group conversation. What else? We also have promoting GPAC and getting more individuals who are from minority groups involved. Let's see, and then also having conversation with City Council about housing. And then the long term is more investigations around housing, zoning, and planning to identify and undo the systemic and structural racism and discrimination that's embedded in those policies.
Nicely said.
Super productive. Did I leave anything out?
Narup and Jennifer are saying, no, stop.
Not asking more questions.
No, very, very productive. And
yeah.
And really thanks again to staff and Tiffany for, capturing everything, and the community for continuing to engage in this process.
As next steps, we will take this package to the council either on the 14th or the 28th of September. It really depends. We'll work with Tiffany tomorrow, check her availability, and it'll come to you in September.
Mhm.
Great.
It is September.
Later
I know,
in September. Thank you. Thank you all.
everybody.
So
Thanks,
are we all
Vice
good?
Mayor Kendall, for your leadership, and
Oh, thank you, Teresa. That was great. I'm very glad we got all these, and I'm glad we were so in sync with where we were taking this, which is great, along with
Yeah.
our speakers. Appreciate everybody. Thank you for joining us, and hope to see you soon.
oh, and thanks to the sound man.
And the sound man. And
Thanks, Jen.
I do have one thing I do
Oh.
want to say is that as we adjourn, it does seem like this topic is getting more and more volatile. And I'm afraid, I really, really hope that all of us here in Lafayette can be extra careful to be as kind and as and involved and supportive, and let's not, let's keep each other safe. That's the goal for everybody here.
Yep.
So thank you. On that, I would like to adjourn. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night.
Thanks, everyone. Good
Good
night.
night, everybody.